Isolation has been a topic of much reporting over the past few years, particularly in observation of the COVID-19 pandemic and its effects on social life. Generally, those effects seem to have been pretty bad. A focal point of on-again, off-again Surgeon General Vivek Murthy's public communications has been addressing a so-called loneliness epidemic, that of course being in the United States. Merck. His office released a public advisory report with staggering figures. Almost half of Americans, 49%, in 2021 reported having 3 or fewer close friends. Only about a quarter, 27%, reported the same in 1990. Social connection continued to decline during the COVID-19 pandemic, with one study finding a 16% decrease in network size from June 2019 to June 2020 among participants. The figures are especially depressing when it comes to young adults and teens. For young people ages 15 to 24, time spent in person with friends has reduced by nearly 70% over almost 2 decades, from roughly 150 minutes per day in 2003 to 40 minutes per day in 2020. Frankly, it seems like the most common form of social critique that exists nowadays is one of the evils of social media. Did you know TikTok is bad? But even though these apps and the phenomena that occur on them are worthy of all kinds of critique, the tunnel vision with which we critique them allow them to become a sort of red herring. I'm far from the first to make this point. One argument in particular elucidates a structural issue that all but forces young people into social media spaces to fulfill their needs for socialization, that being the growing lack of third places. But what are third places? And why do they seem harder and harder to find at the expense of our collective social health? Let's discuss after the break. If you've heard of this topic before and done a little bit of research, you'll know that the term third places basically originates from American sociologist Ray Oldenburg's book, The Great Good Place. In it, he focuses on the community building functions which great good places typically perform, and uses the term third place, after home first and workplace second, as shorthand for it. Oldenburg uses the book to do a lot of historical analysis of great societies throughout history, analyzing the numerous functions of the third places within them. He introduces the book like this: great civilizations, like great cities, share a common feature. Evolving within them and crucial to their growth and refinement are distinctive informal public gathering places. These become as much a part of the urban landscape as of the citizen's daily life, and invariably they come to dominate the image of the city. Thus, its profusion of sidewalk cafes seems to be Paris, just as the Forum dominates one's mental picture of classic Rome. The soul of London resides in her many pubs, that of Florence in its teeming piazzas. Vienna's presence is seen and felt most within those eternal coffee houses encircled within her Ringstrasse. The grocery store become pub at which the Irish family does its entertaining, the beer garden that is father to more formal German organizations, and the Japanese tea house whose ceremonies are the model for an entire way of life, all represent fundamental institutions of mediation between the individual and the larger society. I can see why this concept has come up so prevalently in today's conversations about modern life. It's super captivating. It brings you the idea of something that can transcend postmodern dreariness, a fact of life which has been eradicated, lost over time in favor of further realizing a hell of our own making. But the functionality of the third place, especially when we talk about it in that term and use it in such an open-ended way, is more than a platonic ideal of civil society. So as you can imagine, Oldenburg makes a ton of points about the benefits of third places. To name a few, Oldenburg notes that third places unite the neighborhood, and that they offer a place of convergence for all types of people. Now keep that particular quality in mind as the video goes on. He notes post offices and drugstores as examples of locations that offer important goods and services, and don't necessarily have huge cost barriers, thus being of importance to basically everyone in the neighborhood, allowing for everyone to know everyone else. Even though everyone won't get along, shall we say. Knowing other people in your area, what they do, a little bit about their cultural background, the things they do to have fun, fills in so many gaps of information that seem to be more and more common in a world where people are so digitized that such answers to such obscure kind of questions in your brain require a Google search and aren't easily answered by being able to refer to a bank of social interactions that you've had. Knowing others through these spaces allows you to easily introduce yourself to others in the space, and vice versa. It allows for a type of networking that can help accomplish collective tasks. When you, a local chef, an event planner, an arcade owner, and a graphic designer all know each other, you can converge to throw a really cool event to fundraise for an important cause. This is not so easy and in fact can become really costly when they become services that you have to acquire through websites like TaskRabbit and Fiverr. Of course, Oldenburg also sees tremendous value in third places for youth life. He shows particular concern for the lack of youth and adult intermingling in third places, and the lack of free exploration young people are allowed to have to mess around and learn on their own. And it's this particular aspect of third placelessness that has become so important to the current conversation about modern life, particularly why kids don't get off their phones or whatever. Take this Twitter thread by a Wild Salem from a few months ago, for instance. People really built a society with no third spaces, made it illegal or unsafe to be outside, and then blamed phone use for making teens depressed. I've had this conversation with multiple parents. They want the phones to be the source of the problem because they don't want to admit that we have created a physical environment that is hostile to teenage existence. Here's a good TikTok on the subject about a New York Times piece in particular that talks about the social media thing.
New York Times today, they're talking about the impact of technology in teens, and I just feel like they're kind of missing the point. 15 years ago, we talked on the phone, drove cars, watched movies, went to parties, and so on. My children's social rhythms look much different. And they're talking about how the time that teenagers spend together has significantly decreased, and when they are spending time together, they're just spending that time on their phones. And they go into the counter arguments defending technology. You can pause to read it. Solutions. Teens just need to learn to put their phones away. They need to charge their phones outside of their bedrooms. Boom. Social problem solved. The point I think that we're missing here is the impact that capitalism is having on teenagers today. Talking to my parents literally yesterday about how I can justify spending over $125 a month on my gym membership because my gym is literally my only third space. Outside of work and home, there's not really any other space where people just go to like hang out. Once upon a time when my parents were my age in their 20s, they would hang out at the roller skating rink. They would hang out at the arcade. They would hang out at the local restaurant and just spend hours. And within that span of hours, they would spend maybe $5 or $10 doing that activity, getting a beverage, and then they would call it a night. For teenagers today, if you want to go to a place like Dave & Buster's or whatever, Incredible, I don't even know what exists anymore, you have to spend a minimum of $50 to $100. Like my parents would spend maybe like 50 cents renting a pair of skates. This conversation, I think, as we are expressing concern about teenagers and their lack of socialization, their increase in loneliness, their increase in depression, we also have to think about what is the structure we are creating for them so that they are able to learn how to socialize and be social without it being gatekept. A lot of kids cannot afford to spend $50 every Saturday. My job working in higher education is to literally just create events for college students to show up for free and be able to socialize. And I don't think that experience should be gatekept simply to students who are able to attend college. Phones away and do what? They haven't learned to socialize and they don't have places to socialize.
Oldenburg points to a number of phenomena which have contributed to this detrimental change in daily youth life. He finds that adult life has become more and more oriented toward a liberation of adults from children, geared instead toward entertainment and actualization as productive workers and cool people. At one point, he describes being at this hangout, this poolside hangout, chilling at this annual luau that this friend group does, and he says to his friends, there's only one thing wrong, which is that the kids would have enjoyed this, like his kids. After which he got the looks reserved for people who say weird things. This particular chapter, Shutting Out Youth, has so many great insights that somehow still apply really well to the deterioration of social life today. For one, Oldenburg criticizes the accelerated construction of communities without youth, including the rise of an idea of personal community or liberated community. This type of community, he notes, is not defined in terms of location, but in terms of the accumulated associations of a single individual. One's friends, acquaintances, and contacts, however scattered, constitute his or her network. But this type of personal accruement of friends and contacts cannot be a community because, as he says, community is a collective reality that does not depend upon the inclusion or exclusion of any given individual. To define it as a personal phenomenon is to pervert the concept. And I find that this is one of the trickiest but most important critiques that we can have of ourselves in social life. Especially in today's day and age, wherein we socialize more and more within like-minded groups or groups of interest, like fandoms, we have internalized an idea that our social interactions are valuable on the basis of their being able to serve us personally and specifically, instead of serving a larger community and ecosystem. We only seem to value our friends, for that matter, the friends who get us the most, as well as contacts that can have some sort of impact on our careers, colleagues who offer us some type of important quality. And I'm not saying that there's no value to these kinds of communities. Obviously, for one, many of these communities are forged online in order for people from marginalized backgrounds to find some type of group wherein they can be accepted for who they are, wherein they can experiment with their identity in ways that would not be accepted by the people around them. Plus, I'm one to talk, actually, because I met my girlfriend on Hinge, and many of my friends are people that I've met online and never in person. And I'm always interested in networking with people who can, help me make money or whatever. But there is a certain emptiness that comes with socializing in this way at a certain point. When you measure the value of relationships based on how they align with you personally, how they serve you personally, it becomes more and more uncomfortable to deal with the ways people are different from you, and especially when they disagree with you. On one hand, there's so much value in being able to interchange with young people in different parts of the world and talk about your ideas and truly be yourself. But then on the other end, there is this almost encouragement sometimes for people to completely detach from participation in their daily spatial life, almost as if it's not important at all. How does this relate to third places and youth life? I think what I'm getting at is that there is this seeming overall phenomenon of people opting out of their communities because of opting out of these difficult parts of dealing with other people in service of instead individuating, being part of the coolest social group. And this occurs across political lines. Some people may individuate to be super hard Sigma male, and some people may individuate to try to be the best leftist they can be, as if the point of leftism is to create individual cool people with good thoughts instead of collective political action, which can only occur wherein people, despite their differences, converge in a common goal. And this particularly harms young people because, let's face it, adults don't like young people. We don't. We love to hate on young people, actually. We want to distance ourselves from them as much as possible. We groan every time we hear a baby cry in a movie theater or an airplane. We joke on TikTok about wanting to punt them into the stratosphere. We freaking lose our minds whenever a group of loud teenagers approaches us. Not approaches us, that would freak me out. We definitely don't enjoy being around groups of loud teenagers. This may never change. I can't see myself enjoying these situations, but we don't have to like people to look out for them. And by increasingly distancing ourselves from young people, putting them in specific spaces and scorning them in protection of our inner peace as individuals, we only add to the tensions and repressions that make social life impossible to bear. Oldenburg articulates how this growing separation occurs, especially spatially in communities. Fascinatingly, many of the ways we disenfranchise and isolate teenagers is through ideology that purports to protect them. For instance, we raised the drinking age to 21 in the United States out of a fear of youth drinking. But this only furthers the binge drinking culture that consequently associates itself with rebellion and liberation. We made underage drinking cool. Congratulations, America. We make schooling a process of spatial tracking. We focus less on meaningful education and adventure and more on making sure students are obedient and in place. More and more people seem to be advocating for a genocide of trans people, based basically on an argument of, I'm afraid of what they'll do to my kids, based on no statistical evidence, no real experience with human beings. And that's horrible for, among many reasons, destroying a child's relationship with their own gender. Youth facilities seem more and more coddling and separated from actual social life, which young people are smart enough to pick up on. When youth abuse a facility with graffiti or do other damage, adults are inclined to wonder what's wrong with these kids. Rarely do adults ask themselves, what's wrong with the facility?
Am I so out of touch? No, it's the children who are wrong.
A lot of attention when it comes to this issue has been brought to this increasing phenomenon of teenagers being banned from malls for rowdy behavior. And it's like, come on, man. How many television shows and movies have we seen, have we pushed in teenagers' faces about teenagers hanging out in malls? This is supposed to be a pillar of teenage social life. And then we wonder why these kids end up so rowdy, why they increasingly flock to their phones, to online spaces where they keep learning bad behaviors and ideologies. The lack of third places and the mental health crises of adults and especially youths are a consequence of a social reality wherein people are increasingly encouraged to isolate, to silo away anyone who makes them uncomfortable, especially their juniors. But how did we get so selfish? Why are we now so interested in separation and individuation instead of working together and participation? Let's investigate this after the break. There's a Smithsonian Magazine article by Margaret Osborne about the aforementioned Vivek Murthy big report thing, and it has this fascinating quote by a Eric Liu. Now, interestingly enough, Osborne cites Liu as CEO of Citizens University, a Seattle-based nonprofit that aims to build civic awareness across the country. She omits mention of his past as part of the Bill Clinton administration, working as a deputy assistant for public policy, and then later being on the board for AmeriCorps. The quote I'm fascinated by is one he gives for NPR's All Things Considered, which is a popular afternoon radio show that's kind of like a 60 Minutes kind of thing. It talks about a bunch of stories. Discussing the phenomenon of loneliness, Liu says,
so much of the challenge that we have right now is far upstream of electoral politics and policy.
It is a culture problem. Whoa. Here's the thing. Putting aside whatever feelings Liu may have had about his experience in government, this quote seems like an odd misdirection. Is policymaking and politics really that separated from culture? Of course not. You don't need to be a nerd about base and superstructure to realize that culture is very much affected and even shaped by public policy. And in fact, a big deal of what we do culturally is about reacting to economics and politics. The analysis of third places being a key factor of this loneliness phenomenon is a great window into understanding how politics affects mental health. But in order to have a satisfactory analysis of how economics and class and politics affect public space, we need to look past the TikToks, past the op-eds, even past the Oldenburgs of the world, and delve into the world of critical geography. Namely, we should delve into the work of one David Harvey, who we've talked about on the channel before. His writings on geography, political economy, anthropology are vital to understanding the processes that create cities. Cities which are bad for citizens and have a two-sided influential relationship on politics. In his essay, The Right to the City, based on a famous concept from Henri Lefebvre, Harvey posits that the creation of a surplus product is fundamental to the creation of cities. This meaning that the profits that is extracted by powerful people gets mobilized in the construction of urban environments. Due to the quote-unquote Faustian dilemma present particularly in capitalism, wherein capitalists are the ones extracting this surplus, these same capitalists are motivated to deploy their capital in order to create more capital, or else they risk no longer being capitalists. That would suck. Thus, Harvey argues, capitalist urbanization has been driven by the aims of capitalists to subsume their surplus products into new things that will bring even more surplus value. Harvey writes about mid-1800s Paris as undergoing an urbanization project which is foundational to our cities and economies to this day. France, particularly affected by the crises and revolts of 1848, saw Napoleon III rise to power, who violently suppressed opposition parties and oversaw a tremendous reconstruction of Paris, led by Georges Eugène Haussmann. This was key to enforcing a temporary social stability and to absorbing capital through investments in buildings, in infrastructure, railroads, etc. Especially railroads, but yeah. Paris was reconfigured from a city seen as chaotic and filled with poor laborers to an epicenter of tourism and entertainment. Many years later, after Napoleon III and Haussmann had eventually been ousted in some part due to left-wing working-class opposition, the infamous American urban planner Robert Moses embarked on his seismic reconstruction projects of the New York metropolitan area, citing great influence from Haussmann. Both Haussmann and Moses used debt financing, or using big loans to pay for big things, as a significant foundation for the funding of these urban renewal projects, not only as a pathway for the absorption of capitalist surplus product, but as a means through which working and middle-class populations could become politically de-radicalized. You could get one of the shiny new houses that came from the fancy urban renewal project. You just needed a loan. And as long as you're living in that shiny new debt-financed house, your interests become less about working together with the poor people at the cafe and more about market stability and property values, all of which work neatly with conservative ideology. These very same shiny houses in the suburbs, are the same ones that Oldenburg thinks of when writing about the deterioration of social life. Suburban neighborhoods are the ones especially lacking in third places, lacking in community interaction, premised in providing large, spacious homes which families should never want to step out of, accompanied by propaganda decrying a rise in crime and drug use and debauchery in urban environments, warning of stranger danger, fueling legislation and movements to keep kids under the close monitorship which has led them to be so rebellious. This isolation is not just a side effect of these urbanization projects. It is a goal. In the essay, The Political Economy of Public Space, Harvey delves into how these urban renewal projects are orchestrated with the effect of separating people in different class positions who would previously be in proximity far more often. The effect is creating a sense of order, an embourgeoisement, in which the city is oriented towards well-to-do people experiencing shiny, fancy things. Early on, he uses a passage from a Baudelaire poem in which Baudelaire explains to his lover why he no longer likes her. The poem describes how the speaker sat in a splendorous, unfinished cafe with his love interest, enjoying the scenery, but then was moved by noticing a poor family staring depressedly at the fixture. Baudelaire writes,
"Songwriters say that pleasure ennobles the soul and softens the heart. The song was right that evening as far as I was concerned. Not only was I touched by this family of eyes, but I was even a little ashamed of our glasses and decanters, too big for our thirst. I turned my eyes to look into yours, dear love, to read my thoughts in them. And as I plunged my eyes into your eyes, so beautiful and so curiously soft, into those green eyes, home of caprice and governed by the moon, you said, 'Those people are insufferable with their great saucer eyes. Can't you tell the proprietor to send them away?'"
Anybody who lives in a city can attest to this particular experience. It happens all the time in certain ways. Different classes of people occupying a space, but instead of being able to come together in some way as people who live in the same neighborhood, the poor people basically make the bourgeois or close to bourgeois, pretending bourgeois people aghast with shock and horror, demanding that order be restored in some way. And that's how you get police officers going into McDonald's and apprehending homeless people just because someone else in the restaurant decided to give them food. Harvey writes that this type of division is engendered by these urban renewal projects, at least implicitly, as a response to the political rebellion that occurs when these classes of people are in community. This is true of both of the projects in Paris and New York, which, it should be noted, came after the rise of impactful city-based leftist political movements, the former namely the revolutions of 1848, the latter with organizations such as CPUSA. Harvey writes, It was Haussmann's genius to orchestrate this symbiosis on the ground while fortuitously facilitating the stronger presence of the commodity as spectacle in the new Paris that his works helped create. The bourgeois could thereby assert their hegemony in politics as well as in economy at the same time as they claimed privileged access to and control over the public spaces of their city. To back this claim, they needed legitimate force, and this is what the empire provided in Paris, in much the same way as Giuliani provided it in New York. What a guy! In conclusion, the problem of isolation and thereby loneliness in our culture exists because of rich people and politicians. Surprise! But more clearly, it exists to control rebellion against injustice, to suffocate class struggle. Urbanization has been a crucial way for rich people to bury their money in debt-financed projects, ones that bring them even more money, while creating shiny spectacles designed to maintain order by segregating rich from poor, and offering middle classes their own debt-financed escape routes in order to side with the rich over the poor. And of course, when we talk about Robert Moses, we'd be remiss not to mention how racialized these housing laws and movements are, with racist zoning laws which utilize and empower white supremacist ideals by tethering black people and other non-whites to poverty and underclass status.
A boy last week, who was 16 in San Francisco, told me on television, thank God we got him to talk, maybe somebody will start to listen. He said, I got no country, I've got no flag. Now he's only 16 years old. And I couldn't say you do. I don't have any evidence to prove that he does. They were tearing down his house because San Francisco is engaging, as most northern cities now are engaged, in something called urban renewal, which means moving the Negroes out. It means Negro removal. That is what it means. And the federal government is an accomplice to this fact.
When we understand how race and other identity vectors are inherently tied to class, we can see how a similar effect is engendered by making people from all these different identities have different class positions and struggle against each other rather than against the people in power. To be clear, a lot of you are not from the US or from the West, but it still applies to you. All of this applies to you. All of this is happening everywhere. As Harvey writes, every urban area in the world has its building boom in full swing in the midst of a flood of impoverished migrants that is simultaneously creating a planet of slums. The building booms are evident in Mexico City, Santiago in Chile, in Mumbai, Johannesburg, Seoul, Taipei, Moscow, and all over Europe, Spain being the most dramatic, as well as in the cities of the core capitalist countries such as London, Los Angeles, San Diego, and New York, where more large-scale urban projects are in motion than ever before, and where, just to set the tenor of the times, a recent exhibition sought to rehabilitate Moses as the author of the rise of New York City, rather than the agent of its fall, as Robert Caro had depicted it back in 1974. Astonishing and in some respects criminally absurd mega-urbanization projects have emerged in the Middle East, in places like Dubai and Abu Dhabi, as a way of mopping up the surpluses arising from oil wealth in the most conspicuous, socially unjust, and environmentally wasteful ways possible, like an indoor ski slope. We are here looking at yet another transformation in scale, one that makes it hard to grasp that what may be going on globally is in principle similar to the processes that Haussmann managed so expertly for a while in Second Empire Paris. No matter where you or your family are from, this issue of loneliness, this issue of urbanization and capitalism is affecting you. A study of Haussmann and Moses shows us the playbook. These things keep happening again and again and again. But what do we do about it? What can we do about it? Let's discuss after the break. Third places are a vital part of civil society that are increasingly hard to find. The loss of third places is a global phenomenon in which urbanization is a process tailored toward the desires of the rich and powerful. Capital is deployed in order to produce profit by building shiny stores, cafes, and restaurants, among other things, usually for which there is a steep price in order to consume, and thus significant class restriction. These class restrictions are created with the implicit purpose of avoiding the community building of people from different walks of life, who can come together and become significant political actors combating the will of the most powerful. This, by the way, is your video for when you need to tell somebody why gentrification is bad, even though the neighborhood's getting so pretty and shiny. Whenever we talk about issues of capitalism and these huge projects, it's easy to feel hopeless. What can we actually do? Obviously, the answer to such a question is complicated. I hate saying things are complicated. I should make a video about why I hate saying things are complicated. Because the thing is, it's actually not complicated. It's a fairly simple answer to find. If the issue is one of isolation and people being selfish, then the way we fix things is by not isolating ourselves and being less selfish. And I don't just mean this in an offhanded, liberal, everybody be nicer to each other way. I mean this politically, first and foremost, including the more straightforward stuff. You're talking about unionizing, you're talking about doing mutual aid, grassroots movements, donations, volunteering, and yeah, sure, even voting. But these things must occur with larger goals in mind. The more people participate in small-scale efforts, the more opportunities there are for them to converge, for larger efforts to emerge from them. What we need ultimately is a society where class barriers are destroyed, where the means of production are collectively owned, and where we democratize our resources and work collectively to use them for the advancement of all life. And that's all pretty nebulous and ideological. So let me get into some small scale individual advice, since I know a lot of you like that. Here's something you can do as an individual. Talk to strangers. Interact with strangers outside of your home. Such a suggestion inevitably gets responses from people who feel like this isn't possible given their own personal situations, political repressions, disabilities, etc. I can't pretend to know what your life is like. You may be absolutely right that going out and talking to strangers, going to public spaces is just not something that you can really do. I respect that. But if you're open to the possibility that you can go out and socialize, then by all means do it. Go to nearby public spaces, if there are any. Go support your local third places, if they're still around. Patronize a cheap cafe. Take a walk through the park. You don't need to rizz anyone up or make best friends with everyone you meet. You can maybe just exchange glances with somebody and smile at them. If you see someone reading a book that you know or you like, maybe stop them and be like, stop reading. No, maybe take a second and say, hey, sorry to interrupt. Are you enjoying that so far? Figure out ways that you can make yourself safe in case dangerous things happen, but don't let precaution prevent you from benefiting your community, because ultimately you're safer when you're part of a good community than when you're isolated. And of course, going online is still an option. Not like you would have cared if I said it wasn't. There are many great interactions you can have online, but online third places serve a very different role from offline ones. They can't replace each other. Online third places are dictated by individuals' input to receive entertainment and interaction tailored toward their individuation. They are personal communities, liberated communities, which liberate themselves from the geographical relations within which we get our resources, thus being mostly weak politically and unable to compensate for certain needs. This doesn't necessarily include online spaces that are based in geographical locations, like subreddits about your neighborhood. We've done a video on this channel about community in the past. In it, I argue that collectivism and individualism need to feed each other healthily by being tailored towards achieving things which are beneficial for ourselves and for others simultaneously. The individual and the collective are one. This means that coming together simply isn't enough. We have to be coming together for good reasons, in good ways, with good praxis that focuses on achieving good results for all of us. Focusing only on coming together and having community, having networks, is something that capitalists can easily provide for you. It's something they can easily wash into this thing where you're now obsessed with the community you have at your workplace or at the local really expensive bar or something. In spaces like those, we accept a facsimile of community that gives us the feeling of connecting with others in a large group, but ultimately strip you of the ability to truly be there for others and their political concerns, and orient your focus towards fitting an image of success and acceptance, rather than a genuine relation with your environment through which you can actually work towards getting what's best for everyone. Young people represents the primary group that are damaged by such a social fabric. They're not allowed at these fancy places. They're monitored, forced to follow a path, and repudiated when they don't follow that path well enough, especially when they act in rebellion. We've made it socially acceptable to hate kids and then act surprised that they hate themselves and that we hate each other too. Over the past 100 years or so, we've created more and more places wherein young people have nowhere to go. When young people have nowhere to go, they become insecure. They wonder why they're not good enough to hang out with the adults. They hyperfixate on the escape provided to them by their phones, but the depression and self-hate we cultivate within them doesn't just go away, even when they end up in the absolute safest, coolest spaces of online interaction, much less when they end up in toxic ones. Those young people grow up to be adults with unresolved issues. They lack outlets. They feel dissatisfied with their relationships. They further color the world with a ruthless individualism in hopes that one day they will become the adults who pushed them away. But this only serves to replace their self-hate with hate towards others, to replace their depression with aggression. The young people who follow them risk entering even uglier, more isolated worlds. The cycle continues. Ultimately, when young people don't have anywhere to go, then eventually, neither will the rest of us. And that's it. I ate that. Ooh, that was good. Like and subscribe.